power that it can keep sustaining the charge at. So anyway, as soon as the ROG phone kicks into gear, it very quickly equalizes, even slightly overtaking after just 10 minutes.
And something to think about is that the iPhone also has a far smaller battery capacity too, 4,300 mAh versus 6,000. So there's just less to fill up.
And so the fact that it's even close sends a very clear message that charging speed is not one of Apple's fortes. And yeah, if you look at the final times for the complete charge, ROG phone slips in at 1 hour 7 minutes, while the iPhone still has a way to go. So that's another point to the ROG.
Now, you might well be thinking, well, of course the ROG phone wins all of this. It's a $1,400 phone. But this thing comes with 512 gigabytes of storage by default. And if you go for 512 gigabytes on the iPhone, it's the same price as this in the US, and actually the much more expensive phone basically everywhere else. But surely the iPhone wins in the camera department, right? The camera is one of the reasons to buy an iPhone. Well, both phones have one camera on the front and then a triple camera on the back.
And there's probably not as much in it as you might expect. The ROG has more natural background blur when you're taking selfies. It's just as sharp in 98% of situations, extremely good at those difficult dynamic range situations, arguably better than the iPhone. Not to mention that it has the power to shoot full 4K slow motion, which is far beyond the 1080p that Apple can do.
But where the iPhone does pull ahead is intelligence.
It's the way it identifies and treats faces so that they're the center of attention. The way it uses all of its sensors to focus on subjects instantly, even for finicky, difficult objects that most phones would struggle with. Plus, just generally, the video. Video requires far more advanced processing to be able to pull off well than a simple photo. And this is where the years that Apple has spent refining really pays off. So that brings the score to 4-1. One thing that I think will be a really interesting experiment between these two is Wi-Fi speeds. Because on one hand, most of what the average user does on their phone is internet related, and so you would kind of expect the most popular flagship phone to have that internet aspect completely nailed down. But then again, this thing is all about shaving off milliseconds of lag when you're playing online competitive games. So who actually wins? All right, let's start with the iPhone. We'll do Google's speed test. Wow, okay. It's not too shabby considering we're tucked into an attic. And just over 40 megabits up. Same thing for the ROG phone. Ooh. I mean, that is an absolutely enormous drop-off. That's really, really slow in comparison. But just to see if I could get a result that felt a little bit more reliable, I also ran the test 10 more times in a controlled environment, but there were actually no consistent trends. The ROG seems to have higher peak speeds, but the iPhone seems to have more consistent speeds, especially when it comes to upload. But there's enough variation that I'd say, call this one a draw. But what's even more important than a bit of slightly reduced latency here and there is how good everything actually looks on these screens. So they're both huge displays. The ROG is actually even slightly larger, but you probably wouldn't notice without a side-by-side. And they're both better in their own ways. So the ROG is technically a faster display. You know how phones have been dialing up from standard 60Hz to 90 and to now the 120Hz displays that we see on pretty much every 2023 flagship? Well, this thing has a 165Hz display. Proportionally, that should be nearly as big as the jump between 60 and a 90Hz display, which was huge. And yeah, if you scroll your home pages and record using a slow-mo camera, you will absolutely notice the difference. But my eyes are struggling to. It feels like one of those 50% more effort for 5% more gain type of situations. And to be honest, I think at this point what makes more of a difference is the quality of animations, which Apple really does have nailed down. The ROG does also have a second display on the back, although I would say it's far less useful than the rear displays on most phones that have it. It doesn't let you preview the camera or check the contents of your notifications. It is almost exclusively just for those, hey, look what my phone can do moments. And then for the iPhone, we have a higher peak brightness, 2000 nits versus 1500, which basically covers you for those extra bright outdoor scenes or those extra dark TV shows. I'm looking at you, Game of Thrones and Ozark. It has LTPO tech, which is why it can lower its refresh rate all the way down to 1 Hz when not needed, which, as you've seen, does help it to save some battery. It has a slightly higher resolution and also symmetry. I'm fully aware that the reason this ROG phone has these top and bottom bezels is that people like something to grip onto when they're gaming, not to mention in order to fit these massive speakers in. But I am just too much of a sucker for things being aligned and neat. So for me, iPhone takes the best display award. But now it's time for the big question. Performance. I don't know about you, but I definitely hear a lot about how Apple's Bionic chips lead the pack, how they're 2 years ahead of the competition in terms of power. I mean, Apple's actually reached the point where they've started releasing new phones using the previous year's chips, which if I've ever seen a sign that a company is comfortable that they're ahead, it's that. But then this thing is geared for performance. Performance is what these ROG phones are all about. So let's start with some benchmarks. Opening with Antutu, which is a very general test that looks at all aspects of your phone and gives you one number to summarize its performance. And for this, the ROG is coming out over 30% higher, which is ridiculous. That's more than a generational leap. Bear in mind, I have attached the Aeroactive cooler onto it, which can apparently cool its surface by up to 25 degrees Celsius, and so will naturally improve its performance. And yeah, that's not completely fair to the iPhone, because that's not being cooled by anything. But then again, the cooler did come in the box, so I feel like it would probably be more unfair to not use it. So then we've got GFX Bench, which is going to focus solely on graphics. The entire reason we even need to run multiple benchmarks, by the way, is that while we all do love the idea of just one number that summarizes all performance, actually comparing numbers between Android and iOS is a bit weird, because even the benchmarking apps themselves are two different apps built on two different lines of code. That said, if we take multiple tests and we see consistent trends, that should be enough for us to make a conclusion. And it's going pretty well so far for the ROG, with it finishing this test with almost double the performance. What? But then with Geekbench, which focuses on the CPU, the iPhone is ahead, and not really by a small margin. So to get to the bottom of it, we're just going to run benchmark after benchmark after benchmark, until now, where I have a result.